Hello, 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 everyone. We're back at Black Psychiatry. It's been a while, but I shouldn't have left you. But here we are for our Black Men in Mental Health panel. I'm glad that you are all able to join us live here on YouTube and Facebook. And again, let me just say thank you always for supporting us and for being here. So this Black Men's and Mental Health panel is especially special to us here in DC because this live stream is brought to you in part by the Howard University Resiliency and Recovery Project, or the R&R Project, which is supported by grant funding from the DC Department of Behavioral Health and SAMHSA. So as a part of this grant, we encourage you to do a very brief follow-up summary survey. We'll put it in the chat for you. It's very easy. And also, if you're a healthcare provider or a DC resident and would like to learn more about the educational or mental health services that we are available to provide through the project, you can send us an email. So we'll put that out there for you. All right, everyone. All my panelists, gentlemen, how are you feeling tonight? Doing good? Thank you for bringing your Black excellence here. Again, I don't know how I do it, everyone, but somehow I get these panelists to come and bring their subject matter expertise to us, and we really need to. We brought it for the Black women, but we really, really need to bring it for the Black men, right, sirs? All the things that are going on in the media in this country, we have got to be very clear and very direct and deliberate in providing mental health care. So again, I am Dr. Hairston, and we have some lovely panelists for you here today in alphabetical order. We have Malik Blade, who is an author and a CEO for Whole Brother Mission. He is the author of the 2020 book, Whole Brother: Debunking the Myths That Break the Black Family. He's originally from DC like us, but now in California. Before founding the Whole Brother Mission, Malik worked in the university life as a dean and a diversity consultant. He has earned both Bachelor's of Arts and a Master of Arts and is currently pursuing a doctorate in counseling, and we definitely need more counselors. Quincy Gray is a licensed clinical psychologist at the Howard University Department of Psychiatry. He works with me, and I am lucky enough to be in his presence and be educated by him on a daily. He has been in clinical practice for nearly 15 years, both in private practice and at the University Counseling Center, and he's a 2-time alum from Howard University. Daryl Shorter, our moderator for the night, is an addiction psychiatrist, and he is the new medical director of addiction and recovery services at Menninger in Houston. He's a Baylor College of Medicine assistant professor. So coming in June, he will no longer be the program director like me, but he will be taking over his new role as a medical director. And of course, my partner in crime, Stephen Starks, is a geriatric psychiatrist, educator, and advocate. He is a clinical professor at the University of Houston College of Medicine. It's a brand new medical school, and he's an expert in both health equity and health policy. He was working on the Hill in DC with the senators. You might have seen him on TV. You might have seen him on C-SPAN back there in the background. So without any further ado, he was in the background. He was behind Nancy Pelosi, believe me. Without any further ado, we are going to get started. We have questions. We're going to put up the information for services. We're going to give you all the tips that you need. Also, really, really, really make sure that you ask us questions for the audience. From the audience, we are happy that you're here. Dr. Shorter, take it away.
Danny, thank you so much for having me. Brothers, I'm so glad to see you all here. So glad to see us creating spaces like this for us to have these really important conversations. If there's nothing that the last year has taught us, it is that we really need to invest in ourselves and in our communities and do as much as we can from that space. So I'd like to keep this conversational and like we are hanging out at the barbershop. Not that I've been to the barbershop recently because I actually can't grow hair, but assuming we were like at the barbershop and we were just sitting around and speaking to each other, not just as colleagues, but as brothers, as members of a community. And I want to begin with our first question of the night, which is, what is the biggest current issue facing Black men? And I know I certainly have some ideas about what that could be. But I want to open it up, and we'll start in alphabetical order with Malik. What's the biggest issue, current issue facing Black men?
Well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate that question. Uh, it's a huge question to ask, and I can't boil it down to one thing because then I feel like I'm not doing justice to other pertinent issues. So I can think of a whole bunch of things, but I'll just pick one, and I'm sure these other brothers will be able to provide some nuance and some additional things. But I would say one of the biggest things, especially as it relates to mental and emotional health, I would say is short term fixes rather than long term fixes in terms of brothers navigating through difficulties but only thinking about the short term rather than the long term. You can describe it as putting a band aid on a stab wound. And more specifically, I know that many states in our country are moving more toward decriminalization or the legalization of marijuana, right? But a lot of brothers use that to cope with things uh, rather than actually dealing with the issue itself. And I actually wrote in the book Whole Brother Debunking the Myths That Break the Black Family that Dr. Hairston mentioned. Uh, I can only speak from my personal experience, not just with the Whole Brother mission, but also personally. A lot of guys, a lot of brothers that I know that are a lot of brothers that I know that use marijuana to cope at the same time also have some unresolved trauma. And that then begins a conversation of dealing with the issue in a more holistic way rather than getting by or distracting yourself temporarily. So, I'm not even getting into the debate of the usage of it, but more so turning our attention toward long term solutions rather than short term fixes.
I love that. Thank you, Malik. And we're going to come back to this topic of trauma. I'm an addiction psychiatrist, so I'm going to want to talk about
Yeah.
cannabis at some point. That's going to come up. Dr. Gray, Black men, mental health, biggest issue.
Um, First of all, thank you for having me as well. I don't often get to do this nowadays, but it's actually even more important to me to participate in panels like this, as a father, as much as it is as a psychologist, because I'm really thinking about a lot of these issues as they pertain to my kids. I have a boy and a girl, and trying to figure out what to tell them, how to protect them, how to prepare them for what they may face as they continue to grow up. And when I saw this question about kind of what's the biggest current issue for Black men's mental health, the first thing that jumped in my mind was survival. Um, with everything that we've seen in the news over the last year, just reiterating traumas that we have experienced and lived with for decades or even centuries, if we want to go back. Um, we have been trying to survive. We have been trying to figure out how we are supposed to operate in the world, how we are supposed to go from point A to point B when, if we look the wrong way or move the wrong way or say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, which isn't really the wrong thing according to us, it's just according to whoever we're interacting with. How do we get by? How do we make it to our destination safely? And I think that plagues a lot of us. I mean, we may not be consciously thinking about it every time we get in the car to drive to work or we go get on the bus, but it's in the back of our mind. Depending on where we grew up, we may have had more exposure to traumatic situations like that than others. We may have had threats from, gangs. We may have had threats from just other neighborhood people. But now we also have threats from police. I mean, how many of us can think about the idea of, DWB, driving while black? I would imagine that most of us have experienced that at some point. But now it's, gone beyond, you know, driving while black to just trying to survive, because we're
Living while
perceived
Black.
we're perceived as a threat no matter what. So we're trying to figure out how to survive. And that's in some ways underlying or associated with other issues like depression and anxiety. The idea of being validated, being seen for what it is that we do, which is why we have I'm sorry, I'm a talker. So I'm going to try and wrap this up because I know it ain't just me. But I love seeing those pictures online when it's like Harvard's law class and it's all the black men that are there. Or you see these pictures of people that are doing it. And when you have those likes that show up on the internet, it's like validation for you've made it, you've done it. We see you. Okay. And that's something that I think a lot of us are looking for and struggling with, because there are so many other instances, as in the case of George Floyd, when you talk about the indifference that was in the officer Chauvin's face, the indifference that he just didn't even see Floyd as anything other than an object. We want to be seen. We need to be seen. We need to have our experiences seen, validated, heard. But we also have to figure out how to communicate that. And that is actually one of the other challenges that hopefully we'll get back to talking about in the course of this panel.
Absolutely. Thank you. Dr. Starks.
And it's always hard going last after those great responses, but I think I'm going to try to pick up and touch upon maybe both points that Mr. Blade and Dr. Gray kind of touched upon. And when I was invited to the panel and trying to think about the biggest issue facing Black men, I had to kind of stop and center myself. And the message or the theme that came into my mind was the silencing of Black men. And I'll kind of talk about the different layers and extremes of that, but one can silence themselves or be silenced by others. And so I think that happens in a multitude of factors. I think one, we have our social messaging out here for Black men and boys. So, the message of don't cry, or the messages tied to Black men don't fill in the blank, or Black boys shouldn't fill in the blank. So that social messaging is out there. We can also talk about it through, silencing oneself through unhealthy behaviors. So we talked about aspects of, excessive substance use and, thinking about other problematic kind of behaviors that exist in terms of anything in excess, from sexual behaviors to other addictive behaviors. I think about the silencing that occurs within our education system. So Black men and boys in the classroom setting, from suspensions, dismissals, expulsions that occur there. And then thinking a little bit more about what occurs in the criminal legal system. So whether it's through state courts and the family court systems, of the focus of men as parents primarily being on the financial support through child support, but less emphasis or no emphasis on the social emotional support that fathers and men are able to provide to their children. Or if we think about the other aspects in our carceral systems, or just in terms of sentencing, or disproportionate levels or impacts of rates of incarceration for Black men, or silencing through the loss of your voting rights, or silencing in terms of your economic successes tied to having a felony conviction, and then obviously the extremes of what we've seen all too often lately is this extreme of lethal force. So injury and harm to Black men, and murder of Black men. So I think all of that multitude of factors of being silenced or silencing one another are a large contributor to mental health. And partly I started to think about the Black men in my lives, and my family members, my friends, and there are lots of things that we don't talk about or don't discuss. So I'll stop there because I can go on. So.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's responses, and I've got the honor of trying to piggyback off of all three of you, brilliant men. And what I will say is that I've given a lot of thought to what all of you have spoken about, the impact of trauma and the ways that Black men deal with that trauma in both short-term and long-term, using strategies that may or may not be helpful to them. Certainly the issues related to survival and just trying to navigate this world, and how that is always plaguing us, that is always in the back of our minds. And certainly, Dr. Starks, what you talked about with the silencing of Black men across so many different areas and arenas. When I was thinking about this, I was thinking about how we are born into a world with expectations of us. And so my offering to this very complex and challenging issue is expectation. The expectations that are placed upon us by society that we are supposed to be a certain way. This is in many ways talking about like Black men are supposed to, Black men shouldn't, which is what Dr. Starks mentioned. But I want to complicate that even further by thinking about language and how for so many of us, access to language that describes our internal and emotional state is something that we're never even really taught. And I don't know that that's necessarily unique to just to Black men. I think that that happens to a lot of different people. But what happens particularly among Black men is that it gets attached. It's okay to not speak or share in my family, in my community, because it's part of the expectation of what it means to be a Black man. And so oftentimes when I'm working with patients or folks in the community, my first question is, well, how are you feeling? How would you describe what it is that you are experiencing emotionally? And folks have fine, pissed, or some iteration of that, right? But when you ask people to say, well, give me a little bit more than that, or other than I'm good, or am I, give me something more, something deeper than that, people really struggle. They've never been taught the words to describe what's going on here or here. And so from within this space, of course, smoking seems like a good idea. Of course, dealing with it with alcohol seems like, of course, other behaviors may come into play because I'm not really able to process with somebody else what's going on with me. And I may not even really recognize for myself what's going on with me. And so the backdrop for all of this, I think, is in our communities, infusing Black boys and Black men with the skill of expression and finding language to give light to what is going on. So with that, why do you think it is difficult for Black men in particular to seek mental health treatment, Malik?
Yeah. Are you able to hear me better? Okay, good. Glad we got that fixed. So I want to jump through a few things pretty quickly and then pass it. So I think socialization will be my short answer. And I would point to some specifics. So one, tagging on to what you said about language. Something else that I referenced in the book is how fathers play a role in shaping boys. And at the beginning, I described 4 different types of fathers. And the goal in that was to put language to many guys' experience. And when I explain it or when people read it, it's like you finally put words to what I've been going through. So there's 4 different types of fathers that I mentioned. And these dynamics amongst fathers, I think, are what will create an open space for mental health services or a space where it's stigmatized. So it really depends on how the dad interacts. But the first father is the absent father. It's a father that's just not in his son's life at all. Not physically present, not emotionally present, none of that. The second is the present but distant father. So there's a father that's physically present in the home but emotionally distant. And that ends up being new language that a lot of guys have never heard before because they know they felt that but didn't know how to describe it because dad was there but he wasn't there. The third father is a toxic father, a father that's present but passing on toxic behaviors and thinking. And the fourth is the single mother functioning as both a mother and a father, having to wear both hats. So I think that plays a huge part in how we understand ourselves and what is okay and what's not okay. Mostly the father and mother's input, but mostly the father's and how he interacts is the signal for what's okay and what's not okay. And the other side of this, I would say, in many cases falls on those that men are being involved with relationally, which in most cases are Black women. And mind you, this is all being said on the foundation of personal responsibility because we don't want to just pass it off. You got to do this for me. There's personal responsibility too. But in addition to personal responsibility, I would say it's the father's interactions, but also Black women. Some additional accountability I think that needs to be discussed is There are some spaces, it's not all obviously, but there are some spaces where black women don't create spaces for men to be vulnerable in that way. While we maintain the idea of men can't cry, men can't hurt, it's not okay to not be okay, we maintain that, but I do think to a certain extent, some men, when they were vulnerable in romantic spaces with women, have had that used against them later, or had their masculinity questioned, or respect lost. So I do think there is a level to which some may be open to seeking additional support and addressing that and being transparent in that way, but maybe a response from a mother, a father, or a female they're being romantic with push them back to a place where they realize I'm not going to go there again.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is not something that we only do to ourselves. I mean, it is something that is pressed upon us by other members of our community as well as culture at large. Dr. Gray, Dr. Starks, anything else to add?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, what you all have both said in terms of how men are socialized is absolutely, right on point. Um, and we have to change the conversation. We have to address it in a lot of different ways. I think that obviously women are a little bit ahead in that they are socialized from very early to be okay expressing emotion. But for black women, they still end up carrying that weight of you got to be the strong black woman. You have to be prepared to live a life that may not have a man in it because they may be taken away from you at some point. You always have to be ready. And as such, it makes the women strong, but it you couple that with bad experiences with guys who are trying to take advantage of them, and it puts them in a space of saying, "Nah, I can't trust you. How do I trust that you're going to be around and do it? Do what I need." And so then they do throw that back at us until they find somebody who's able to hold them, not just physically but emotionally, hold them and provide that kind of support and validation that they need. And that's something that we as men have to learn how to do. And it means we got to take some licks along the way, but we don't have to do it alone. Um, like when I'm talking to folks about seeking mental health, seeking mental health treatment, one of the examples that I often give, particularly when I'm talking to men, is something related to sports. Okay, because that's usually something we can relate to. And it's important that when we're communicating what it is that you need, we put it in terms that people can understand. So, sometimes in the medical community, we'll say, okay, going to see a therapist is like if you broke your leg, you would go see a doctor to get it treated, right? Mental health, mental illness means that there's something wrong with your brain, so you go and talk to somebody. But some people say, my brain isn't broken. I'm okay. I'm just having some difficulty dealing with X, Y, and Z. So then I put it like this. You ever play basketball? Is it 1-on-5 or is it 5-on-5? Or maybe 3-on-3 or 2-on-2? If you're playing one-on-one, the example doesn't apply. But in any of those other circumstances, if you're playing with other people, then everybody has a role. If you're getting double teamed, you call for help in some kind of way. That's what going to see a therapist, a counselor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, that's what going to see a support person is. It's calling for help because whatever's coming at you has gotten to be too much. We don't think you're weak on the floor if you call for help. We think you're making good use of your team. So we need to be doing the same thing when it comes to our mental health. We need to be thinking about things in a different way. Y'all heard the concept of John Henryism? Okay. I mean, I know, and I'm going to break it down at least a little bit for those who are listening who may not have heard it. But if you haven't heard, if you don't know the story of John Henry, go look it up. It's on, you can find it on YouTube, you can find the video, you can find it on Wikipedia. Just type it in and you'll get the story. Basically, John Henry was a steel driver man. He died with his steel driving hammer in his hand. He went up against a machine and just through sheer force of will, he beat this machine at a race in terms of who could drive in the most states for a railroad. But in doing so, it cost him his life. And yet, that is what many folks in the Black community continue to do. We push and we push and we push. Long past the point we should have asked for help. Long past the point that it's been healthy. And so we have to learn to look at health in a different way. We have to learn to look at mental health in a different way and say, you know what? Maybe I need not push so hard because I'm not pushing just for me. I'm pushing for my family, for my kids, for my partner, for my parents, for the kids who look up to me. I'm pushing not just on my job or for my job. I'm pushing for the cause that I believe in. But there comes a point where that pushing can be too much. And sometimes you need somebody to help you say, it's okay to slow down. It's okay to figure out another way of handling the situation so that we can live a longer and healthier life and be more satisfied in what it is that you do. You just got to be willing to ask the question. You got to be willing to communicate. And
Yeah.
so women got the leg up on us, but if we work with them, they are more inclined to help us, and they will help us more than we can ever ask.
Yeah, that's great. I'm going to take a question from the chat, also from Christopher, and this is for you, Dr. Starks. How did we get to the place of men shouldn't have feelings? And even to piggyback on what Dr. Gray just talked about, what about John Henryism and how that plays into our place as men?
So I'm gonna try to map that because I wanted to steal that other question too, to speak from a different perspective. But
You can
I'll
loop
try to
them all
blend
in.
I'll blend them
Blend
all
them.
in together. So please leave that question up just as a way for me to remind myself to respond to that one. So in thinking about uh, Black men and the avoidance or why they don't seek treatment as often. So I look at it from, or think about it in the context of structural factors and think about the socio-political factors, why that kind of comes to play. So if we think just in general about the disparity that we have in access to insurance, I think that's one of the key reasons why people don't seek help, right? You don't have access to it. How affordable is modern day healthcare? It's hard to really kind of truly engage in care. And if we look at something like voting, which again is habitual, right? How do we learn to go to the polls through each election cycle, right? Your parents take you in the booth, and as a kid, they tell you press here or turn here, or they have you kind of look at the sample ballot to kind of see who you might choose, and maybe you might learn a little bit about the candidates. Then I think engaging in health related behaviors is the same way. I think women have the benefit, or maybe not the benefit, depends on how you look at it, right? Of when women hit puberty or girls hit puberty, they're starting to have conversations related to their health, or starting to talk about the potential for childbirth and labor, and so they're engaging in women's health. They're seeing a primary care doctor. Men don't have that necessarily that same benefit, and so if we look at the differences in health outcomes for Black men and compare those to other races, ethnicities, and genders, we see that Black men do fall behind. So the age-adjusted life expectancy for Black men in the U.S. is 72 years of age, and for every other race, ethnicity, and gender, it's nearly 5 or 6 years higher. So there is something going on broadly in our health, not to just talk about mental health. So the one key issue is access. We know that there are different rates of access to employee-sponsored insurance. We know that there's issues in terms of many states, especially southern states, currently in the midst, even though we have the Affordable Care Act, that have not expanded Medicaid. So we're leaving a lot of people still with a coverage gap and access to services. And we know as folks who provide healthcare, how expensive those services are. So that's the access issue. Again, broader socio-political influences there, in addition to what was discussed before about issues in the community. And then the other aspect is awareness, right? So we talked about the language that we have for mental health problems, right? I can, again, share from my own personal family experiences. So when a family member of mine had, some severe symptoms of severe mental illness and had some paranoia and hallucinations, me as a kid, nobody knew how to respond to it or react to it. So people would look the other way. So although it might be odd for someone to stay in their room or, cover the television with foil or, not leave their home for a year, I think it's oftentimes we don't have the language to address it. And really the health system itself hasn't always been very kind to Black people in its history and its present. So I don't want to focus so much on the history, because these are real issues now where we have folks who are actually, professionals and have expertise, oftentimes misinterpret symptoms of Black boys and Black men or dismiss it or offer different types of treatment, or have trouble really kind of reaching Black men where they are, right? Typically have to go in a hospital setting, in a clinical setting, but we have to do better by reaching out to think broadly about community-based services. So are there opportunities for us to engage churches or barbershops or kind of the community leaders in our particular areas? So I think the health systems need to be more kind of creative and curious about how to connect with those individuals who were struggling. And in terms of getting to a place where Black men shouldn't have feelings, I think obviously Black men do have feelings, right? But the expression of the feelings is often different. So it's oftentimes in terms of a Black man's performance. So their performance in sports or physically, or performance in terms of work or activity. So those are the things that tend to be valued in our culture, and often obviously kind of very, very distorted in our culture. And I think it's hard for us to figure out the language of expression. So I think it's okay for us to be angry, right? We can see that, and people recognize what Black man's anger looks like, but I don't think they often recognize what's underneath that. So is there sadness? Is there disappointment? Is there loss? And I think that's something I think we need to challenge ourselves to recognize. Recently, I had, I would say in the past couple of years or so, I started to think a little bit more about some of the kind of seniors and elders in my family, the Black men who've made it. Some unfortunately did not survive. We talked about that life expectancy. So some of the men in my family did not live beyond the age of 60. But I think about those Black men who are still here and with me, and I didn't realize how much pain that they had overcome in their lives. They started to share and open up a little bit more about it now, but I think we just have to listen for signs of Black men's feelings and offer opportunities so that they can be open and expressive about the feelings that they do have. So that was a lot. That was 2 questions though. So
Yeah, that was great though. I want to transition here and loop back to a part of the conversation that was raised early on by Mr. Blade, which is the issue related to trauma. And we have witnessed so much trauma vicariously, as also on our social media, on our smartphones, on the television over the last year, and really much longer than that, but it feels probably much more present for us in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder. And so I want to ask our panelists, what do you think the impact of seeing these images of Black men being traumatized in this way, how do you think that ultimately sits with us? And what do we do with that?
Yeah. So I'd say first, I'd recommend resources to process through that, because everybody's situation is different. So what we do at the Whole Brother Mission is we have a nationwide network of culturally competent Black mental health professionals, from psychiatrists to psychologists to social workers to LPCs, LMFTs, all of it serving the entire country, because we recognize some of the discrepancies and issues that have been mentioned in this conversation. And what we do is connect Black men with someone that may take their insurance, help them apply for insurance, Medicaid if they don't have it. And if they're both unemployed and uninsured and meet certain parameters, we do cover the fees for them to see a mental health professional, or create have some alternative options that don't include insurance, because sometimes insurance can be a barrier to mental health services, even though it's supposed to be there to help. So just wanted to put that out there. wholebrothermission.com. You can be connected with a therapist. But in addition to that, going to a therapist to process through what we're seeing, one way that I think it has an effect is maybe some internalized inferiority. A level of not aspiring to more. I do think some of us may not realize this is happening, but we have an understood dichotomy in our heads that actually puts us at the bottom. And what that looks like is, well, I don't deserve or I'm not worthy of getting out of this situation when I see how the world deals with people that look like me. So I connected with hip hop and rap and how many of the artists that are prominent today. So I think one of the most streamed artists is a guy named NBA Youngboy, whose story is just trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma, and it's all in his music, and guys are eating it up. And uh, and even though there's money there, we just kind of end up staying in that space because we think that this is just the way life is. It's just become so normalized to where someone can talk about having to raise themselves next to a crack house, and that's normal. So I do think unintentionally, because of how others look at us as less than, we begin to accept less than and not aspire to more.
Yeah, there is a feeling of inevitability of struggle. Like we expect that that is also part of
Around the corner.
all aspects of life. Dr. Gray.
I actually kind of want to piggyback off what Malik was saying, just with the idea that around entertainment. I mean, I'm going to come back to the first part of the question, but the idea of entertainment and how so much of, yes, hip hop and whatnot has been based on the struggle. Um, I mean, you can go back, yes, Biggie, Tupac, Jay Z, Sugar Hill Gang. You can go NWA. The list goes on and on. When and that has become what has been held up as like real hip hop, true hip hop. It's got to have the struggle. But what we don't hear with the same volume are the people who are having struggles in other ways. Like it's great that some of these artists have taken their struggles and made it. They have used the avenues open to them to show success, to say I survived. But we have so many more stories like that of the kids who survived the struggle. We're seeing more now where it's like this kid who survived this difficult environment to go on and get all these scholarships, to go into STEM or to go into medicine or go into, the arts or whatever. And we're starting to see more of that, but it still doesn't get the same airplay as, the musicians. So we have to do a better job of increasing the volume around those other measures of success to let people know how the other options are open to them and
Can I
letting them, huh?
can I just jump in on that? I love what you're saying right there about increasing the volume. I don't know if you all have had a chance to watch the Tina Turner documentary. If you
Yeah.
haven't had a chance, you got to watch it whenever you get a second. One of the things that I took away from that documentary is that we didn't really want her to come out of her trauma. It wasn't really particularly interesting to us. Every time she had an interview, it was always about the trauma. And people sort of couched it in, well, you've overcome all of this. But it really took her right back to the trauma over and over and over again. Every interview, every movie, every book always comes back to that. And so I think that there is a part of us as human beings, perhaps, but certainly in this community where we want to hear about the struggle. Like you're saying, Dr. Gray, we want to hear about that and constantly talk about it as though it's triumph. And sure, of course, it is triumphant, but can we have people do something beyond that as well? It can't always be about that. Sorry for interrupting, but I just wanted
No,
to
it
put that in
that's
there.
a that's an excellent point. I'm glad you brought that up because what you're saying is exactly what we need to do. And if nobody says it, and we don't have more people that are saying we want to hear about more than just the trauma. We want to hear about the path you took to success, and we want to hear about how you're coping and adjusting now. Because it is a challenge to say, yes, I overcame the struggle, and here's how I'm resisting the messages or the push that people have to try and keep me there. Here's how here's the effort that it's taking for me to evolve and continue evolving. When what people want to hear is we want to hear that first, like that first song that you wrote. That's what we want to hear. But it's like, I've got 20 other albums. Listen to that. And so we have to look for examples. And I think because of where we are now with, um, yes, social media, but also just stories that are coming up more and more often of successes and people with voices who are saying, I am more than just my trauma. I am more than just the experience that I have. I am a person. I want to be seen in my totality. And we have people speaking to that. As we are having conversations right now and speaking to that, I think that we'll see a change. It's just not going to happen right away. Because there's still a lot of forces that we're up against. I mean, the idea of how do we cope with trauma, for men, I think we walk around with the shield. We walk around with the armor, like Iron Man. We walk around with, anger and strength and that raw image, because it's protection against the fear that we carry inside, or the anxiety of, are people going to see me for me? Are they going to allow me to be me? Anything. Am I going to be good enough? That inferiority complex that I think Malik mentioned. So we have to protect against that. And really, in order for us to heal, in order for us to grow, in order for us to move forward, just like in Iron Man, the shield or the suit of armor has to evolve. Like I'm guessing that everybody here has seen the Iron Man movies. We all know it. And if you remember that first suit, what it looked like versus, how it evolved over time and allowed him to do more things, have more flexibility, offer more protection, and grow. And the struggle that he went through, like in Iron Man 3, the panic attacks, before he understood, no, part of my process, part of me protecting myself is the tinkering. It's making the changes that I need to my armor so that I am better prepared for whatever it is that may come. So that as I face a new challenge, I'm taking that information, integrating it into what I know, and creating a new system. And then I'm trying to pass that information on to others around me. Remember the Iron Spider suit. Remember the suit that he made for Pepper Potts. I'm obviously, I'm a nerd. I'm a geek, but it's okay nowadays. I can own that, take that, and run with it. Yeah. But it's this idea that we have to allow people to evolve. To go with entertainment, Jay-Z is a perfect example. When he started, he was talking about slinging drugs and being out there on the corner, and that was his thing. But look at how he's evolved to what we consider him hip-hop royalty. Even though he don't live in the streets anymore, there's no way he could go back to that. He lives in a multi-million-dollar mansion.
Several.
Yes. He has evolved, and we've allowed him to do that. But he fought for it. So we have to allow others to do the same, and we have to encourage those that are fighting to evolve to say, keep going, keep fighting. Mm-hmm. We will support you as men, as we support our sisters, we support our brothers. We will support you in your evolution, because that's what the world needs to see. Not just where you were, but who you're becoming.
And I'd just like to add one more thing to that, if possible, just that I've found that brothers do need to hear this, and it's that your struggle doesn't have to be your peak. So many of us think that the story just kind of ends with perpetual struggle, and life isn't necessarily going to be perfect, but there are days that you can see where you don't have to struggle the way you are. And in addition to that, ways around, over, through, or out of that struggle are not necessarily, and I'm glad you mentioned Jay-Z, but more money and fame and success is not always the solution to those struggles. You can get the platform and the money and still carry those same struggles. So that's why all of us are here coming at things from an emotional and mental health perspective and saying, yes, that success is great, but you also need to look internally too, to begin to evolve and move past those struggles, because money, you can't buy your way out of depression. You can't buy your way out of trauma. You can distract yourself temporarily, but look internally to get through the struggle rather than just focus on the external and accomplishments.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Dr. Starks, did you want to add something in about the impact of trauma that we are experiencing right now and today? I'm monitoring, just for everybody that's watching, thank you all so much for your great questions in the chat. I am monitoring, and we're going to get to some of those in a minute.
Yeah, I did want to Yeah, maybe pivot a little bit to talk about the impact of racial trauma and the conversation that you all were having about kind of the focus so much on the on the trauma rather than the triumph, and not really thinking a little bit about kind of recovering from trauma. And I thought about it over this past year, how seemingly the larger community seem to recognize that, oh, there's racism and looking to make change. But a part of that conversation, it seemed as though the expectation was then that we as Black men were then supposed to share our experience of traumas that we lived through. So had you experienced racism in this situation, or, oh, I wasn't aware of this, or did you want to, people who wanted to have a conversation about any of the number of police murders that have occurred over the past year, to get you to share your opinion or your perspective, as if that wasn't re-traumatizing or triggering in some way. And there is a large body of evidence that suggests that there are local community impacts when instances of violence like that occur. So the community does have, what we look at least from the clinical sphere, as kind of clinical signs of depressive symptoms after they occur. And so thinking a little bit about, in my role as a psychiatrist and working with Black men who, some of my patients have shared experiences that they've had, negative police encounters, police firearms placed in their mouths, or teenager who was kind of roughed up and aggressively treated by a law enforcement officer or recovery officer at their school. And again, sometimes our books don't train us, we as Black mental health professionals. So I think oftentimes about what's the larger response if someone is even able to access a mental health professional to help them through their issues. How many of those mental health professionals are equipped to help them deal with the racial trauma that they experience? So thinking a little bit about environments of support. So whether that's the community and the collective resilience that many communities, Black communities have, thinking about our own. We talked a lot today about the arts and artists, but thinking about our own ingenuity, our innovation, in ways that we've kind of maintained on our own sanity in the midst of the numerous injustices that we faced over the past decades, the past centuries here.
Yes, thank you. We are going to pivot in just a moment to start talking about our healing. But before we do that, there's been a glaring omission from the conversation thus far, and that is COVID. It's been brought up in the chat several times, the impact of coronavirus, this pandemic. And so I think it's important, and I'd like everybody to address how you're seeing COVID manifest in your work, in the community. And then after we've kind of wrapped all of that up, we will pivot to start talking about our healing. Malik.
Okay. So for us at the Whole Brother Mission, there was an astronomically large spike in demand for mental health services from Black men, because that's primarily who we serve. And the age bracket was 19 to 32 was the primary demographic of men reaching out, about 90%. And much of it was related to unemployment due to COVID and the inability to provide, which would obviously put a man in a very volatile state. So that was all of 2020. And then the day before Thanksgiving 2020, we had over 300 men reach out. So I know culturally at one point we could have said that Black men aren't interested or don't want to get mental health services. But I do think generationally, I don't know if you want to call it millennials or Gen X or Z, I can't keep up with it. But the younger ones definitely are more open to it than previous generations. So COVID, I think, has pushed on us in that way due to unemployment, but also it has provided or produced a very strong relational strain. So couples that used to have some time away from each other when they went to work may both be teleworking and at home. And it has put a strain on several relationships. And in some ways that has been good, and in some ways it's been bad. The way I will say it's been good is for some, it's turned the attention toward the necessity of working through communication, understanding each other's love languages or communication styles or upbringing, past hurts, traumas, insecurities, goals. A lot of times, just being real, many of us as men are driven by the physical, but don't put up much attention into more unseen things that are just as important. So I would say that in addition to creating a demand due to unemployment for mental health services, COVID has also put a strain on couples that have not worked through liking and loving each other well beyond physical intimacy.
Whew. Don't go there. Okay.
Well, Malik really hit all the, I mean, it's almost like I don't even know what else to say after that because he hit so many of the issues that come up. And I mean, I'm glad to hear you mention love languages. I know that's going to come up before we wrap this up again. Um, just from my perspective as a therapist, but I'm thinking about the patients that I see mostly. Like at least a third of my caseload right now is are Black men. But I'm thinking that some of them I was seeing pre-COVID, and it just so happened that as COVID came up, and we had to have this huge shift in terms of how we were providing services. The concern was still, how do I get my needs met when I no longer have the access that I was just starting to get comfortable with? But others are, have been coming back saying, with everything that's going on, I know I just need to talk because I have other things that I need to talk about. So COVID has kind of highlighted other health concerns or other areas that need to be worked on because now people have time to think about it. Now people have time to really say, well, I promised myself that I would give myself time to really work on me and my issues. Now is the perfect time. But now they're running up against the barrier, which is basically wait lists. I mean, just about every mental health agency in the area is overwhelmed. We keep trying to bring on new providers, but at the same time,
Yes. Yes.
it's like
Yeah.
we can't get enough providers to meet all the need. And like I've called some places and they're like, we've got a 4-month waiting list for patients or for clients to get seen, for therapy. So, the conversation is happening at just about every mental health agency, probably nationwide, if not worldwide. How do we need to modify our services so that we can meet more needs without burning out the providers that we have?
Absolutely. So in addition to access, Stephen, I want you to talk just a little bit about COVID and the impact that you're seeing on the community from your perspective.
Yeah, so as someone who advocates for issues pertaining to aging and older adults, I would be remiss if I didn't specifically talk about the impact of COVID-19 on Black seniors. So I think we all are aware right now, and I can't remember the specific statistic, but it was 1/3 to 1/2 of Black Americans know someone who has died by COVID. So that's an extreme number. And I think we have to be obviously mindful about the impact on our elderly and on our seniors who have had a number of losses over this past year of their friends, their classmates, their spouses, their siblings. And so really, I think is important for our community and all communities to really kind of rally behind our older adults. We obviously appreciate their wisdom and their insights, and we attempt to value them as much as we can in our community. But I've seen so many ageist comments and ageist headlines over the past year that it's been very kind of disheartening for me to see. But I think a lot about the seniors that I work with directly, and don't have a lot of older Black men actually in my caseload, few and far between in that regard. But I do know, at least from listening to the experience of my parents and their friends, that it's a very challenging time dealing with so much loss on a weekly or monthly basis, hearing very bad news over the course of this past 13 months.
Yeah, absolutely, Stephen. I agree. Malik, you have one more thing you wanted to add in? No? I want to make sure that I talk a little bit about, because I'm the addictions person on the panel, how challenging it has been for people to establish some sort of recovery from alcohol and or drugs, how difficult it has been for people to maintain recovery. So we're seeing folks relapsing. You can't turn on the news or look at your phone without an update coming out every other week about the number of overdoses that people are having. Accidental drug overdoses have skyrocketed over the last year. And that doesn't just impact white communities, that also impacts Black folks too. And so I know that there's a lot of, and I'm not going to do this today, but there's a lot of feeling around the way that the opioid epidemic has been handled within the press. And I think it's all valid for the record. But that doesn't mean that Black people don't also die from opioid overdose, as well as other kinds of alcohol and drug overdose related instances. And so we have to, again, think about the language aspect. How am I talking about the stress that I'm experiencing? How am I talking about the loss that I've experienced, or the grief that I've experienced? Or how am I talking about unemployment and how I'm feeling about that, as opposed to immediately turning to the bottle or immediately turning to a drug in order to manage something that really we don't always have a great way of managing unemployment in an economy like this right now. So we have to sort of turn outward as opposed to turning inward. Okay, so now we're pivoting, and I want to make sure that in the remainder of the time that we have, that we spend talking about healing and creation of safe spaces and what that looks like. So piggybacking off of Bobby F's question, concrete steps to overcoming and thriving, healing, safe spaces.
Yeah. So I always recognize that sometimes these questions are very weighty. So we have limited time. So I want to be clear. I want to answer the question, but also redirect to resources beyond our conversation. So this is actually a lot of the themes that we've hit on are things that I've addressed in my book as it relates to us getting to a better place, because the idea is if we don't, I think that ends up affecting Black families as a whole. So first, I'll just say I have it here. You can check it out on Amazon, Walmart, anywhere books are sold, but also on our website. It's Whole Brother, Debunking the Myths That Break the Black Family. And I answer that exact question more in depth there. But just as a teaser, I think it has to do with parenting and socialization, specifically as it relates to fathers, but also us turning the tide so that future generations of Black men don't have the same pressures to be a certain type of man that is actually not even human. I think we need to be given the freedom to be human, and that includes emotion and vulnerability. But so often we're relegated to one type of manhood that ends up robbing us of our humanity. So in terms of healing, there's a variety of different things I can hit on. The one I'll zoom in on is our relationships with each other. So often, rather than healing, we cope with substances, preoccupation with work, finances, sex, and things of that nature. But I've found, and obviously I'm an advocate for therapy, right? But I have found that a lot of the issues that people do bring to the table, while it's great to talk to a therapist, some of these things could be worked through if if Black men had friendships with depth, relationships that go beyond just going to the club together or football together or haircuts, but actual conversations where there's a level of vulnerability. One of the things in the book in terms of communication is the communication pyramid. And at the top of the pyramid is cliches, just sharing facts. Just sharing things like people that go to church may say, "How you doing? I'm blessed and highly favored," or "What's up? Chilling." You know, things like that. Cliches. That's at the top, level 5. Under that is level 4, sharing facts, what you know. It's raining outside. Under level 4 is level 3, your opinion on the facts. It's raining outside, so I think I might be late to work. Under 3, under opinions, is level 2. Your feelings. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling upset. I'm feeling vulnerable. And then at level 1 is just full transparency, sharing who you are. And so often our relationships, specifically with other men, stay at the top of the pyramid where we're just sharing facts or cliches. And I do think if we had more meaningful friendships where we had situations where we could express ourselves in all our facets and be met with someone that has a level of care and concern, we could heal quite a bit. I do think the lack of healing is due to a lack of healing spaces. So if we had friendships that were healing spaces, that would make a huge difference. And one more thing, I'll be remiss if I didn't mention this. Recently had a podcast interview around this subject that kind of went viral on Twitter. Black women are not rehabilitation centers for black men. And it was sisters arguing that you can't come to us and be your free therapist and your lover and your mama. So again, so that we're not putting everything on the sisters to wear all these hats, your friends, friendship relationships having more depth would be extremely helpful.
I actually really like that. I actually wondered if people spent maybe practice for a month actually, saying how they really feel when somebody asks them how you doing, or how yeah. I really like that, being kind of open and honest in friendships. I think that's hard to do.
And if you haven't had a chance, I did listen to Malik's Whole Mission podcast on that topic, and I absolutely recommend it. It's a great episode. All right, Quincy, if you were going to say where healing is.
I can't even say oddly enough. I think it's apparent that what we need are those kind of safe spaces. We need those kind of safe relationships. And yes, they have to go beyond, the barbershop is great. We go, we talk, we, cut up. And sometimes some real deep conversations happen there. But we need more than that. We need more authentic, deep friendships where we can actually be transparent. And that's a harder thing to find because we haven't had practice at it. Or, as Malik said earlier on, sometimes we've been transparent and it's gotten thrown back in our faces. So, we get burned. We don't go back to that thing that burned us. But that's exactly what we need to do. So, as I was thinking about this question, one of the things that really hit me, and I'm speaking more so from my experience, is just the benefit that some of the men's ministries at various churches have had, because they have tried to create that safe space where people can form friendships. And those friendships can be encouraged and nurtured and developed and go beyond just, they can have, we're going to get together and watch football. Or, we may see each other at church and be like, what's up? How you doing? Blessed and highly favored and whatnot. But they can go beyond that, where the brothers will say, no, man, I asked how you were really doing. And I get the sense that something's going on. Let's go over here and talk for a minute. But part of what happens in those spaces is that people are working and intentionally being the type of friend that they think they need. And the more that we do that, the more that we take on that impetus, take on that initiative to do that, the more we can have these deeper friendships. Now, I do want to say this, and this is going to kind of come out of left field based off of everything we've been talking about, but I feel like it's important. A lot of the stuff that we've been talking about tonight has been from a heteronormative perspective, right? Men and women talking in that regard. And I feel like there are some men who are dealing with sexual identity issues or sexual orientation issues, who maybe feel like, well, y'all aren't including me, you're not speaking to me. And this is the type of thing that I've shared with others and been burned on before. Everybody, if we're talking about men or black men, every man has to be included in this conversation. Every man has to feel included and feel like they can have that space, feel like they can make that connection, even with somebody who is not like them, but somebody that's willing to listen and say, you know what, I may not understand all that you do, but I understand the emotional stress that you're under. I understand the struggle that you have around how do you define who you are for yourself? How do you deal with those pressures of recognizing that what you do may not be something that a lot of people understand or accept, but I can still accept you and work with you as a friend because we connect on other levels. I don't have to agree with what you do in the bedroom to still be boys, but we have to get to a point where we're comfortable with that. I think that's just something that we need to be talking about, as we are saying to everybody. We need to be more authentic, but we can't be authentic if we don't bring all of ourselves to the table and have conversations about how uncomfortable that may make people feel. So.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one, actually. I do think that there is something to be said about creating space for these sorts of conversations, right? And I agree wholeheartedly, Malik, that relationships with others, vulnerability, and the creation of those sorts of safe spaces is really what's critical in moving forward. And what I will also add is that you're right, Quincy. This has been a largely heteronormative discussion. One of the things that I talk about with my husband often is that I was called a faggot by Black people way before I was called the N-word by white people. And so when we get into like the real nuances of like community and what all that means, we do have to take a step back and talk about how we need to create space for all kinds of Black men, and what that looks like when I walk into the barbershop versus somebody else. Is there space for me too in this conversation?
So when I was giving the example earlier of how in straight relationships, Black women may not create a space for men to be vulnerable, I did think of what you're mentioning now. But again, I don't necessarily have much background for that same dynamic that Black women put on the men they're dating. I'm not sure if that plays itself out in homosexual relationships. However, I do think that I'm glad we brought this up. This is also something that I addressed is we, I think, have a culture in many cases today that seems to be very progressive in terms of sexuality. But I can speak for myself, but I do think I speak for a lot of others. Having grown up in Southeast Washington, D.C., inner city environment, there was no openness to the idea of homosexuality. And especially as it relates to Black men, it was seen as something that takes away your credibility and masculinity. So many of us have grown up in cultures where that have produced a level of bias and hate and trauma for brothers and sisters that are, or specifically brothers, because I do think Black women get more freedom to experiment sexually than Black men do because we're expected to present a certain way. So I do think that in terms of that, we can do better in terms of how we treat each other community wise, specifically speaking about men. I'm only going to speak for me, but I do know that it goes beyond where I came up, that we have ingrained in us in many cases to accept all other forms or to accept several forms of immorality, abuse, leaving the mother of your children, illegal activity. We accept a lot of those things, but we'll then turn our back to a brother who may be living a homosexual lifestyle. And something I felt the need to point out is the inconsistency there, where a personal choice is frowned upon, but then we accept in our circle abusers and drug dealers, and that's inconsistent.
So I understand what you're saying, and to loop Black gay men in the same sentence with abusers feels like a re-traumatization in some ways. Like,
Well, I'm saying that's the problem. I don't agree with. I'm saying that's the problem.
okay,
That the categorization is putting it there because, like I said, there's a choice, and then there's immorality. And I would say that the problem is culturally, unfortunately, it is put in a category that way, and that traumatizes people. That itself is the problem.
okay. Yes, and not a personal choice.
What do you mean?
That someone's sexual orientation and identity is not a personal choice, not a choice.
Oh, well, I guess what I'm, yeah, well, forgive me for that language. What I was more so just pointing to is a lifestyle, whether it's a personal choice or not, a lifestyle isn't the same as someone as it relates to a lifestyle as it relates to sexuality is not the same as someone engaging in illegal activity, being abusive, not taking care of their kids. Those are two different categories, I would say.
Okay. We'll
Yeah.
pivot back. Yeah, we'll come. Danny, you got to have us back now. We need another panel. We need a whole.
I didn't mean to open
another
up a
panel.
can of worms. I think.
I'm glad you did it, Quincy. Thank you, Stephen. In our remaining time, because we want to focus again on healing, come on back and into the conversation and talk to us about healing.
Yeah, so the thing that I was thinking of as we were having this conversation about healing, and we started kind of with at home, right? In friendships, relationships, communities, can you find healing there? So outside of a clinical space. I'm thinking about some of the challenges, at least that I see some of my patients face with that, right? Are there examples, role models, mentors who can, show them what it is to be healthy or live healthy? Can everybody find that, right? Like, is there example or model that you look to that you can turn to in your marriage, your relationship, with your parenting style and choices? Do people have access to that in terms of helping to support kind of healing, so someone they can turn to for advice and support? I think that one thing that is helpful and that seems to be more popular nowadays is Black people. We're having this conversation today. We're talking about mental health, so we are having the conversation. I know people who share either their experiences in treatment, with treatment, taking medications, in psychotherapy, or their engagement in other types of mental health seeking services. And I think those conversations are important to have. We've seen the discussion, I think, a lot in hip hop, where certain artists have shared their experiences. We've seen that with certain actors. We've seen that with certain sports figures. And I do think getting the word out when people are in our skin sharing their experiences is one way to help people to recognize whether or not they're alone. In order to heal, you do have to recognize, are you hurting, right? When are you hurting? Where does it hurt? All those questions are important. And I think I think the summation of questions, at least that we ask in terms of a mental health services space, are these questions. So if you're out in the audience and wondering about your own healing, is asking yourself, do you have peace or joy? Are you able to relax? Do you sleep well and feel refreshed afterwards? And are you able to concentrate on the activities that you'd like to engage in? And so depending on your answer to those basic questions, is thinking a little bit about, again, ways to promote healing in your space. So whether or not you have access to insurance or access to someone to turn to for treatment is important. And I also do think about the other ways that our culture and our policies can promote healing, right? So I think about some of the challenges, and we talked about the barriers to why Black men don't engage in treatment, but are there opportunities for us to advance economic policies? Are there opportunities for us to look a little bit better at our medical leave policies, especially leave policies for part-time employees? So those are people who often struggle because they don't have access to health benefits, and they can't take time off from their employment. Or are there other kind of ways that we can do better to start young? I think somebody earlier talked about social and emotional learning and school-based systems. So how are we teaching our Black children about their own emotional health and making them aware, giving them the language earlier on? So I do think there are policies out there that can also help to promote healing. It doesn't always have to be self-determined. We can be self-determined people, right? But I do think that it's important for us to build structures in place so that we get the types of care and support that we need.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Stephen. Last question, and this will go to everybody, all panelists. One coping strategy and how to implement it so that the folks that are watching have something to take away. Malik, we'll start with you.
I would say it may sound overly simplistic, but talking. I know that many Black men are opposed to talking too much. Don't want to say too much. Don't want to express too much. So while I do get the idea of being tactful and when you speak and what you say, I do think many of us could benefit from being more open to just talking. And that doesn't necessarily even mean going to a counselor or a therapist, but just with your mom, with your dad, with your siblings, just making the time to talk. Because I do think always being in grind mode, we can be so focused on accomplishments that we miss the benefits of community, even community conversations like the ones we're having. So being intentional about making time to talk to the people that are in your life, to listen and learn from them. And when you do have those conversations, being intentional about having them getting down to levels 2 and 1 that I spoke about earlier. So being intentional about having conversations with your community.
All right, that's great. Talk it up, y'all. Quincy, final thoughts on a coping strategy.
Well, I'm gonna go with my favorite coping strategy, and it's what I call 5 minutes a day. I talk this over with my wife all the time, and sometimes she gets on me for not practicing what I preach, as it were. But you know, in the process of trying to know ourselves, know what our strengths and weaknesses are, know where we're trying to grow, know where our struggles are, and figuring out how to process that. Sometimes we think we don't have the time to do it, or sometimes we're dealing with a lot of stress and whatnot. We just, we feel overwhelmed, we feel depressed, we feel anxious and whatnot, and we don't know where to start. We don't know how to move. And if we can just get going on something, just a little bit, that inertia can keep us moving forward. So I like to use the 5 minutes a day principle, which is, if there's a skill you're trying to develop and it feels daunting and overwhelming, just try to do it for 5 minutes. Whether it's reading, writing, journaling, exercising, meditating, standing on your head, whatever it is, commit 5 minutes a day. I mean, that's nothing. That's a couple of commercials. If people watch commercials anymore, now we just fast forward through everything. But, you can have 5 minutes out of your day at the beginning, in the middle, at the end, to just say, what am I going to do for myself, for my spirit, for 5 minutes? Eventually, if you need more than that, then you end up taking more than that. But you start by just giving yourself the permission to focus on yourself for 5 minutes. Set a timer if you need to, but just giving yourself that openness and being kind to yourself and saying, I'm going to give myself 5 minutes to just do this. And it's something that really hit home as I became a parent. Because
that's great. 5 minutes.
Yeah.
5 minutes, y'all.
That's it.
All right, Stephen, one coping strategy.
You said one. I'm going to try to keep it on the technology tip then, since that's technically one, but I'll throw a couple of things in it. I think one, watching those who are maybe kind of too engaged in the media, whether it's television, streaming, or social media. I think we have to be aware that that has a large impact on our emotional states. So watching anything that you take in is important. So that's kind of one technology tip. And then the other, I think, will just be tied to kind of education. So using the internet to search for, develop your language, develop an understanding about what's helpful or healing for you. And then I guess one practical or tangible is the support through the National Alliance on Mental Illness. NAMI has a great resource on Black mental health matters. That's a great kind of resource guide that offers, I think, tips and skills that are easy for people to access and use and practice, and a source that you can kind of easily turn to for inspiration for your own healing.
Thank you, Stephen. And I will offer one as well. I love what has been said. Sleep. Sleep is just critically important. Rest. It's important to get your rest. I recently have discovered some of the best relaxation sleep meditation podcasts. You got to find the one that's right for you. Find the one that doesn't have water trickling or bird sounds and bird noises. Those never work. They may work for you. But you got to find the one that works best. Try lots of different kinds. And, it'll help you hopefully get your 6 to 8 hours, because we really need our rest, especially when we are under so much stress. So I think Dr. Hairston's going to join us again for a final wrap up. Boom.
Yes, I'm here. Let me just say that, okay, people are getting a little loud in my neighborhood. Let me just say thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for bringing this discussion really where it needs to be. And we have so many great questions that we didn't get to answer. So either I will make sure that we put the answers. I'm going to get our panelists together to get some answers to these great questions, and we'll put them up on Twitter over the next couple days, or we'll put them up on Instagram. But let me just really say thank you to our panelists, and thank you to my friends and answerer of all my questions and requests, Daryl Shorter, for moderating the panel. You have been excellent, and maybe you can just take over. Let me say that, so thank you to everyone for joining. Again, thank you to our partner and our sponsor. Thank you to Howard, the institution that raised and paid me. And thank you to the DC Department of Behavioral Health. So again, I'm going to put in the chat the survey that we're doing. If you like what we're doing, if you want us to come back, we need you to put it in the survey so that we can get some more sponsoring from the DC Department of Behavioral Health. So thank you so much to them. Also, if you need help. So that's what's really important now, that we're able to offer services. So if you need help, if you're a healthcare worker or a Washington, DC resident and you need mental health help, please email us at the howardrrproject@gmail.com. So it's Howard RR Project. I'll also put that on Twitter. If you live in DC, if you provide healthcare services, we are making sure that you get at least several free therapy and counseling sessions. So this is really important, and this is something that I'm really happy that our project at Black Psychiatry at the Howard R&R Project and DC Department of Behavioral Health is doing now. So if you need help, I think that's what everyone on the panel said. You need to talk. You need to make sure that we get that done. So thank you so much to the DC Department of Behavioral Health, Dr. Hall Brown at Howard. Thank you for all of that. I'm going to make sure that this is the survey. Anywhere, answer. If you liked it, if you want us to come back, if you don't, keep it to yourself. But thank you to our panelists again. This Black Excellence has been wonderful. Don't forget to look out for Malik Blade's book so we can really get into a deep discussion. You can find all of us, and if you can't find us, I'll show you how to find us on the socials, and make sure that you keep us aware of what's going on. Keep us in your comments, share. This will be up on YouTube for sharing tomorrow, and we'll make a post so that you know. Make sure you follow us on the socials, at Black Psychiatry. And let me just say that the women brought it, the Black men brought it. In our next session, we are going to bring Dr. Shorter back to talk about addiction in the Black community. So please be ready. Please be ready to come back with us. And make sure that you just protect your peace daily. Protect your peace for at least 5 minutes per Dr. Gray, but sometimes, especially for those of us who are out here working, you gotta do it even more. So protect your peace, research, talk, anything else, sirs, that I missed. All the comments were great. Thank you for so many wonderful questions, and we will answer those throughout the week on Twitter and Instagram. And thank you for your support. Good night, everybody.